And I just laid down and took a quick little nap. And I was awakened by the feeling of somebody hugging me. And I rolled over, and standing in front of me was my grandmother. And I was asleep, but I was aware I was asleep. So it was a lucid dream. And she didn't talk. She just looked at me with this knowing look. And then I heard the words, "Get to work." And it was so strong. And I felt it almost as though she was putting her arms on my shoulders and squeezing me, like, "Get to work now."
This is Unconditioning, Discovering the Voice Within, with Whitney and Jenkins.
Hello, and welcome to the 33rd episode of Unconditioning, Discovering the Voice Within, where I bring on guests and we talk about the inner authentic voice and the challenges and the rewards that come from following it. This week, I have with me Devon Duerr. Devon is a certified angel intuitive. She is a speaker and a writer, and she just recently released her new book, Book of Evidence, Proof Your Angels Are With You, a guide for intuitive living. Devon and I talk about her journey and her story, from her experiences with angels, how she went from her business background in accounting to now being very passionate about helping others connect with their angels. I've personally had a one-on-one reading with Devon and found it to be incredibly accurate. So I was really excited to talk to her about her process and her past experiences that led her to this point. And I really think that you're going to enjoy hearing Devon's story and all the wisdom that she has to share. So here is Devon Duerr. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. It's been interesting energy down here, but really good. I've been excited about it because I knew it would be an authentic, deep conversation, and those are my favorite things. So.
Good. Okay, so as you know, since you've listened to a couple of the episodes, I'd like to dig in a little deep to get started. So in order for you to get to do all of the amazing things that you are currently working on and the life that you're living, you had to start from somewhere. And so I really like to go back to the beginning of Devon and see what was the moment that you remember really identifying with your inner authentic voice. And you realize that it was purely you and it wasn't influenced by your environment or your family or anything else, but that was you. Do you have a moment in particular?
I do have a moment in particular, and it still had to grow a little as far as me honoring it. But it was the summer after my freshman year in high school. I had signed up to go on a missionary trip with an organization. And we had been assigned mentors to develop our testimony in this particular Christian faith. We were going to go to an island and share about our experiences with Jesus and our testimony. And I'd never done anything like that. I was raised in a Christian home, but it was a loving, non-forced way. I was allowed to experience Christianity in the way I wanted to. And I liked to go to my friends' houses and go to their churches. I liked to experience different faiths. And so even though I was raised Episcopalian, I was in this organization that was a Baptist background. I went to friends' Catholic churches, had all these different experiences, kind of tried the different faiths within there. And this was through our school that we were doing this organization at our school that was organizing this missionary trip. And if I'm being completely honest, I was going because of the really cute boys that were also going on the trip. I was excited about it, but it was also like,
Right.
the cute older guys in high school were going. And so this is a tropical island. Sounds fun to me. But I did always have what I felt like was my own connection with God. And so I was excited about that part as well. But when we were sitting having this, this mentor that I was sitting with, having this conversation with, was asking me a series of questions to pull this testimony out of me as to the moment I asked Jesus to come into my heart and knew that I was a Christian. And being 13 years old, I wasn't really sure I could identify that. I wasn't from that particular faith where it was this big moment. It was something that I kind of just did growing up, I felt like. And so I was trying really hard to answer her questions well so that I could do a great job coming up with this testimony, even though it terrified me. And she asked me, well, why do you think God put you here on this earth? And it was in that moment that I really felt this inner voice say, you know this. But I didn't know. I looked at her and I said, I haven't figured out what it is yet, but I know I'm here to do something. And the look on her face was not what I expected. I would say she was looking at me like, who do you think you are? I caught it. I caught the look. I think she tried to change it quickly. Like, okay, little girl, sure. But I definitely felt this energy of what makes you think you're so special. And in that moment, I felt this separation. I felt a separation from what we were doing as a group. And I began watching the way people interacted and felt like everyone was being conditioned to behave a certain way, respond a certain way, act a certain way in certain situations, use certain words and language. And it was sheep being, told to stay together, stay in your spot. And it actually ended up, when we went on the missionary trip, there were more experiences there where I just felt this pure separation from the group. I felt alone in the middle of a group of people because I didn't feel the same connection with the message that was being shared. And I don't want to sound as though I'm being critical of that or criticizing anybody's belief systems, but it was that moment that I realized, wow, I really feel differently. I felt like as a kid, I was allowed to experience God in a way that was kind of me figuring it out on my own. I felt closest to God when I was with my animals, when I was outside. I never really had to question where God was. I kind of just knew how to find God. And I assumed everybody felt that way. Right. I think it wasn't until I started dabbling in different faiths and learning from other people and talking to people that I realized that actually a lot of people do struggle with that feeling and knowing. And sometimes it's the vernacular or the way that we're taught to interact that is actually causing the separation.
Right. It's the conditioning, which is the whole theme of this podcast, is
which
to
I love.
Uncondition that. So it sounds like this trip that you went on, because there was a cute boy, turned into something really quite profound for you in identifying your authenticity within that. That's really cool.
Yeah, and absolutely. And the boy, of course, didn't even notice me. I was still very much a wallflower at that stage, but I did have some big moments where I started to understand that there's a lot of ways to approach your inner voice and your spirituality and your connection. And when something that comes up that's that visceral, that much of a separation, it's something to be looked at.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not stuffed away. Not, okay, well, I don't know why I feel that way. It must just be me. Yeah. So I feel like that was kind of the beginning of me trusting, when I felt something was not right, or I felt something was very much right. felt really good and safe and loving, that would be my clue to either remove myself from the situation or,
Yeah.
find different people to talk to.
You found your compass in a way.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that was actually something my dad and I would talk about a lot growing up. He loved to lecture us to and from school, and he would tease that, he would create ways to slip a lecture in anywhere he could. And we would talk about your moral compass a lot, and how do you know when someone else you're interacting with has a moral compass or is in tune with theirs.
Oh, wow.
And so I like that terminology you're using as well there.
Yeah. Let's see. So that's very sophisticated of you to be able to identify those feelings as a 13-year-old also.
Well,
Especially in that like that time, there's so many changes, especially for like a young girl, like thinking about all of that combined with just like coming of age. So how did that affect you after this trip? How did you come back from that trip? And did you integrate that into your daily life?
I think I decided that I needed to be careful with who I talked to about my spirituality. I had a really good friend that was very devoted to her faith, and we would have a lot of deeper conversations about it. And I felt like she was good about educating me on her faith, and I could listen without necessarily feeling in the wrong because I didn't know. So I was careful with who I talked to.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely, again, I think I retreated to my animals. I always did that. I grew up with horses, and we had a place where we had our horses and lots of different animals. And that was my sanctuary for sure, to go out there and just kind of get away from a lot of the formality that comes with a lot of religious organizations or just functions like that. And then my grandmother, she was an enormous mentor for me spiritually, and just watching her evolution. And she would talk to me about it all the time. And the way that she, noticed the connection with animals and myself, and how she could see that it was a spiritual thing for me. And she would often use the phrase, "What is dog spelled backwards?" and just drop those little comments here and there, just encouraging me to trust my connection with animals, and trust my connection with God, and trust that, there's a lot more than what we might initially get from just sitting in a building listening to somebody else talk about it, but it's the actual experience. And I think that's really, for me, is I loved and knew what the feeling of experiencing God was. And I felt a lot of that came through being outdoors, being with animals, being by myself also, not necessarily in the loud, crowded room, doing whatever everybody else was doing.
Yeah, you were able to intuitively know what you needed at the moment in order to feel aligned with yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And I did just kind of instinctively want to be alone with my animals when something felt off, when I was feeling hurt, or like maybe the people I was with weren't in the highest integrity at the moment, and I would feel this need to retreat. I definitely wanted to go get back in alignment with my animals and being outside and feeling safe with that. A lot of my more profound moments in connecting with God and feeling divine messages from God came after I'd spent the morning cleaning horse stalls and turning out horses, and, just doing kind of like was mundane daily task of taking care of animals. But I just feel like that vibration, the vibration of being around animals and being outside and just, experiencing this physical reality would help get me into an alignment where I could hear those messages later.
Yeah, I feel like doing mundane tasks like that also gives us the opportunity to turn a part of our brains off and allows us to access other parts that allowing those to come through.
I completely agree. And I did not understand that when I was first really trying to deepen my meditation practice and really intentionally connect on another level. I would get really frustrated because I had 2 little kids and I would be putting laundry from the washer into the dryer going, I'm never going to have time to meditate now. It's like this inner complaining. And one moment at one point I heard in a very, distinct voice that sounded like my grandmother's voice, Italian grandmother, well, you're never going to have time because you don't make time. And all of a sudden I thought, well, how do I make time? And I started doing things more intentionally. When I folded the laundry, feeling the clothing, when I was washing the dishes, feeling the temperature of the water, feeling the vibration of the water, and trying to bring awareness into those tasks, at least helped me feel a little bit better that I wasn't getting hours of meditation in like all these other teachers claim to be doing. And I'm so behind on my meditation practice. That's one of the things that I've heard a lot of people say, and they chastise themselves because they don't do enough of it. And right. I'm really into journaling. That's where I get a lot of my messages. And when I teach journaling, that's the biggest thing is people will get excited about it and they'll start doing it. And then life happens and they don't touch the journal for a couple of weeks. And every time they walk past it, they feel guilty.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, that's not the intention. We definitely are not trying to attach guilt to this process at all. If you're feeling bad when you walk past your journal, we got to shift this up a little bit and find a better way to approach it where you're not feeling bad.
Right. Yeah. So journaling, I journaled a lot when I was a little girl, probably around 13. I was like, I couldn't stop writing. Did you have that tool for you at that age?
I was a little more resistant to it. I did creative writing and I love that, but I wanted it to be poetry. I wanted it to be, pretty. And, I didn't get as much into the more automatic writing that I do now and just the, deepened reflection. But I did have influences around me. I think it's always amazing the way we attract certain people in our lives that stand out and they're subtly encouraging you, whether they know it or not. And this was, again, this friend that I was able to have these religious conversations with. She was a very, very much a creative writer, very talented writer. And so she would encourage me. And it became a little bit of a competition to, trade pieces. But I did always approach my diary more as like dumping my feelings all over the page.
Yeah.
And so I didn't understand the value of reflecting and reviewing what I wrote, because who really wants to reread that? If you're going through a breakup
right.
or something and you're writing it all over the page and then going and reliving it, there's a lot of resistance to that. And it wasn't until I got older that I realized that you can journal and you can do reflection in a way that you won't mind reviewing it. Not that that's a bad thing to do. I think it's really helpful, but I could kick myself so many times for when I would just toss out some of my writing because it was just me crying on the pages over something.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish I had those.
Yeah.
I really do wish I had those to go back and reread. I have some things, some diaries here and there that I kept more because it was a gift that my mother gave me as a diary, or it was a gift from a grandmother. So that's the reason I kept it. But I had a lot of things that I wrote in that who knows what happened to them. At some point they ended up in the recycling bin and, hopefully aren't being posted somewhere that I don't know about. But just, I wish I would have kept that. And I wish I knew, or I wish it was taught more in creative writing classes and stuff to go reread your personal journal and see how far you've come.
Right. And now with technology coming in so like rapidly, and that like tangible like feeling of like having a pen to paper, I feel like that might be a lost art almost.
I completely agree. That's something that I am very passionate about, is the actual physical pen to paper is really what I feel like is giving your heart a voice.
Yeah.
It's more of a connection there. And since we are here experiencing being a physical being, it would make sense that that would be a good channel for us to connect and allow our heart to really speak through us in that way. And I agree with you. I know there's a lot of people who just feel like, they want to use their technology. Um, I, I still will always say, even if that's something that feels easier for someone, you really are giving yourself, your future self, a gift when you journal, when you write down your experiences, when you take time for self-reflection. You are giving yourself a gift in the future. And that's why, I now am very good about keeping everything organized, and I can go back and reflect. But some of my college journals, if I could find those, they were in, your cheap 67-cent spirals. So I'm sure they ended up in a box somewhere and got tossed. But, I do wish I had that. I wish that was something I could go back and see what I was reflecting on. And a lot of times it would be only in the toughest parts of my life when I was going through a change that I would journal. And that's another thing that I'm learning now, is I'm so grateful when I take the time to write about the good things, or even the mundane things, as you mentioned. Sometimes that's where I'll see the synchronicity in something, is I'll see the way I needed help with something and I wrote about it. I mean, I needed help getting my errands run that day and still having time to get this work project worked on and all these other things. And somehow it happened because that morning I was journaling about it, and how am I going to get all this done?
Right. Yeah. So I think that even though you don't have those things to look at now, the energy of them was transformed in a way because you were able to put the pen to paper and get that out of you and have it be released.
Absolutely. It was so helpful to me. And when I went through a relationship change back in the early 2000s, I was encouraged by my dad to go ahead and see a counselor. And I'd never done that before. And what I found, and she really encouraged me to journal as well. What I found is I was so much more prepared for our sessions if I took the time to sit and write in between. And so when I would sit down, I think we met once a month for about 6 months to a year. When we would sit down for our little 50-minute session together, I could get right to the heart of what I was struggling with, because I had kind of spent all this time writing it all over the pages, and I could zero in on the things that were really bothering me, or I felt like I needed to work on. And she ended up being, in her own way, a spiritual teacher for me, although she didn't refer to that at all in her practice. She was one of the ones that taught me about when I would recall a memory that, I was really in a lot of pain over, for example, crying a lot over something that had hurt me. She was the one that talked about visualize yourself going and hugging your past self. And I actually did have an experience where I was heartbroken. I was out in the garden, heartbroken over something, and sobbing. And I felt something hug me. And I was behind, I'm sorry, I was by myself with my animals, of course, out in the garden. But there was nobody else there. I just felt this energetic hug, and I was able to catch my breath and calm down. And I've always wondered, about that. Was that really me in the future, soothing my past self?
Oh, wow.
And just that concept alone right? And what we
Yeah.
could do to heal ourselves was new to me. And, I felt obviously I was guided to her to be my counselor for a reason for that. And we didn't spend a lot of time on it, but it certainly helped me a lot with decisions I made for myself going forward. And again, strengthening, listening to my inner voice, came from all that reflection.
Yeah. Opening another idea or way for things and information to come to you. I want to go back to this question that this person at this retreat asked you about your purpose in your life, because that's a really big one. And I think it directly ties to our authenticity. And sometimes it's really not easy to come up with that answer. And it's more of like a feeling or a knowing. So did you ever have that conversation with your grandmother? Because she seemed to be sort of a mentor to you.
I did talk to her about the idea that I was being made to feel in that conversation that I really wasn't special, that I wasn't really put here to do something special, which I believe absolutely everybody is here to do something special. Everybody is special. And just knowing that that was wrong and I didn't like the way it made me feel, I would have those conversations with her. And she always took a lighter approach to this stuff where it wasn't really pointing fingers. It was just an observation. But she would say, isn't it great that we're all so different? Because wouldn't this world be a boring place if we were all the same? Mm. And that I felt like was her encouraging me to be different, to be okay with not fitting in, or to be okay with people looking at me and going, yeah, I don't really know what she's talking about. That makes, that doesn't really make sense to me. I want to stay away from that. I don't want to hear about it. It makes me uncomfortable. And for me to be okay with that, that's not somebody I'm supposed to have a conversation about this stuff with. And so, yeah, she would always really encourage me to follow the things that I was passionate about. Definitely with the animals. She was my big champion with my horseback riding growing up, and came to my horse shows and, encouraged me to always keep that as something special for me. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that was another way that she was a mentor, is teaching me that is its own form of self-care and self-love, is to have these things you're passionate about that you make time for, that you don't apologize for, that if you're in a relationship with someone and that becomes an issue, that there's a conversation around that you're not just giving up something of yourself to be in the relationship. So I feel like she taught me things that could be used in so many situations, especially dealing with family relationships and just living your daily life.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah. So how did this question propel you forward in your life? Did you go on this journey to seek out the answer?
Not until, I would say it was more of a inward journey until I was older. In college, I didn't really know. I had always wanted to be a teacher growing up. I knew that. I would play school at home and make my sister be my student. And I had worksheets and everything. Yeah. It was like, that was my favorite thing to play.
Yeah, we did that too.
My chalkboard.
We had a great book.
I was being a little tutor for her. And so I knew that I wanted to do that. But I wasn't really sure. My dad was a CPA, and our family has just always been into business. And it was kind of like, well, but our family does business things. So you can be a teacher, but first get your business degree and then get certified to teach. So I went to school to get my accounting degree. And I didn't really want to, but it was the one that was easiest for me of the different majors in business administration. And I like numbers. So it was easy for me, and I didn't mind doing it. But I didn't really like the path it took me to, because it seemed like a lot of the jobs that were coming up for me for when I graduated were going to be where I was kind of in the background behind the scenes, not really doing something that was showing who I was.
Right.
And I didn't have an idea around that. I didn't really feel like, oh, I need to show the world who I am. I didn't feel that way. I just felt like being in a back office doing ledger work was not something that I was excited about. And I knew from watching my dad do it, the different pathways, and I was just doing it just to do it. And then we had some experiences at the college I was at where we had a lot of loss with some students. I went to Texas A&M University, and we had several tragedies in one semester, including when the whole nation saw about bonfire falling and several students were losing them. And it was a wake-up call, of course, for, anyone that age. A lot of people that age haven't lost anyone yet.
Right.
And then I went and did my internship for accounting and saw how little people saw their families in the track I was in. I was doing the auditing track, and they traveled a lot. And I would often notice just how they were talking to their spouses by phone most of the time because they weren't getting home till late at night, or their kids, they were missing bedtime. And I always knew I wanted to be a mom too. I always knew I wanted to be a teacher, and I always knew I wanted to be a mom. And those are really the two things I was the most clear about. And I also knew I always wanted to work with animals, but I thought I wanted to be a veterinarian until I started shadowing them and realizing that was not for me at all. But I was still just kind of doing what I was told with the major. And I did this internship, and I really liked the people I worked with, but I saw the lifestyle as something I did not want at all. I did not want to be stuck in a skyscraper in a little back office with no windows, working these crazy hour weeks. And so then after my internship, my horse that I had grown up riding, and who I always say was my best friend growing up, she suddenly got ill, and I lost her. And that was a wake-up call for me as well, as far as realizing, well, that's my passion. What do I do now? I mean, that's where I would go for my retreat. And so that was jarring. And then in June of 2001, I had a premonition dream about 9/11, which I didn't discover till about 10 years later, that people all over the world had premonition dreams about 9/11. So obviously we as a collective were being prepared for that, and whether we realized it or not. But what I specifically remember about the dream was the skyscraper and the people in the skyscraper and the plane hitting it. And all I thought was, I don't want to be in a skyscraper. I want to be with my animals and my family. And so I turned down, after the internship, they gave me a job offer for when I graduated, and I turned down the job offer. People thought, why did you go to all this trouble if you're not going to take this job offer? And I graduated with my accounting degree with the intention of either getting my teaching certificate or getting, I was actually thinking of going to school to some type of equestrian school, so I could teach horseback riding and have my own barn or something. I knew I wanted to be doing something I was more passionate about. But I still hadn't figured it out. And so within the following fall, when 9/11 happened, it kind of shook everything. It shook everybody, right? And it shook my family's approach with me. And I felt a lot of pressure to just get a job for now, and we'll figure out the rest later. So I took a job with a bank, and was working at the bank when it hit me that, I was still right back in that path that I was trying to get out of when I turned down the job offer earlier. And so I started talking to my dad about, what if I tried going out on my own when I don't have a mortgage, I'm not married, I don't have children, what if we did this? And so he helped me formulate a plan, and I went out on my own and started doing really basic stuff initially, just bookkeeping and tax returns and all that. But it kind of grew into consulting because I found that the passion there was the entrepreneurs. And that would get me really excited. So I did that. And I did other types of things as well, with family ventures and things like that. So I got to experience a lot of different things, all using my accounting background. And it wasn't until I'd been doing that for about 16 years. And that's when I had a dream where my grandmother visited me with my dream that it was an activation. Basically, it was, you need to get back on track with your purpose.
Right. Your authenticity. Yeah.
Exactly. And so that's when I felt like I really started actually doing the exploring. To go full circle back to your original question. That's when I started, I started adding yoga to my daily workout routines. I started doing a lot more meditating, a lot more journaling. Automatic writing became my favorite pastime. Just seeking more knowledge and more evidence for these experiences I'd had growing up, it was an inner knowing that there was something more. There were messages I was receiving, but wanting to put it into a framework. And this probably came from the accounting side of me. I wanted structure because I wanted to be able to go talk to somebody about my intuitive experiences and spiritual experiences, and them not look at me like I was crazy.
You know what? I don't think that's uncommon, because I feel like, especially me too, I didn't have someone in my life like showing me what all of these experiences meant. So I had to like search for the meaning myself and like try to make sense of them. So yeah, like
that's what I'm finding too. I think when you have that opportunity to do it yourself, it's a door that opens that never fully closes again because you were there, you experienced it. So do you still journal a lot? You said you did a lot when you were younger.
I know that I should, but there's part of me that resists it because I'm afraid of what's going to come out, I think.
And that's what I hear. I know I should do this. And I totally understand. I have days I don't feel like journaling at all.
I find in profound moments of transition in my life that it happens automatically and naturally. So,
and you feel the pull towards it. Yeah.
Yeah. But I want to go back to you and your initiation experience of this experience that you were describing with your grandmother.
Yeah. So I was actually, again, outdoors. I also like gardening, and I was getting my spring garden prepared and digging in the soil. I always think there's something with that as well. You're grounding yourself, you're out there in that high vibrational energy. And I had actually, my husband and kids had gone to the store. I kind of had the day to myself, and I decided I'm going to run in and take a quick power nap before I start planting my tomato plants and all this stuff. And so it was the middle of the day, and I just laid down and took a quick little nap. And I was awakened by the feeling of somebody hugging me. And I rolled over, and standing in front of me was my grandmother. And I was asleep, but I was aware I was asleep. So it was a lucid dream. And she didn't talk. She just looked at me with this knowing look. And then I heard the words, "Get to work." And it was so strong. And I felt it almost as though she was putting her arms on my shoulders and squeezing me, like, "Get to work now." And so it was very brief, but super vivid. I mean, I did wake up after that and feel like she was still standing there next to my nightstand. And it was, I had a lot of dreams growing up, and not everybody remembers their dreams, but a lot of people will say they had dreams when they were kids and then kind of stopped dreaming and stuff. I was fortunate that I've always paid attention to my dreams and been able to remember them, but, didn't always assign any meaning to them. And this was one of those dreams that's just really stayed with me. And it shook me to the point that it was all I could think about. And I went out, back out into the garden, and it was just a hot spring day. I was getting everything ready, And all I kept thinking was, what did she mean by get to work? What does that mean? What does that mean? And I was thinking about all our conversations. And one of the things that we shared is when we had both seen what we considered an angel at the end of our beds at different times. So I saw 6 of them when I was in college, and she saw one like a few years earlier, and I'd completely forgotten about it. She told me about it, and I didn't put the seriousness behind it until it happened to me. And I felt like I couldn't talk to anybody about it, but my parents knew about it. And so they said, go talk to grandma. And so I went and talked to my grandmother about this experience. And that's when she started teaching me a lot more about her experience that she had. And she had done a lot of research on other people having experiences like this, near-death experiences. So she really helped me have those conversations initially about what else is out there outside of what you would get in formal religion or in just a day-to-day conversation, the kind of the unseen that tends to maybe even scare some people.
Yeah.
I mean, this wasn't a scary experience for me at all. I just wanted to know what the heck it was.
Right.
And so she had told, when we started talking about these experiences we had, she goes, well, it was either an angel, it was either my guardian angel, or it was my mother. And I said, okay, well, what makes you think that? And she said, well, we had a deal that when she died, she was going to come back and tell me she was okay. And that everything was fine on the other side. And we just had a deal. And it was either her coming back or it was her sending a messenger, but she said, I had the confirmation I always felt I needed. And that was our agreement. And I said, well, were you going to do that for me? And she said, you betcha. And I felt like that was her doing that. And in this case, she came as herself. So it was very obvious it was her.
Yeah.
I think most people will admit to having experiences they can't really explain, but they know what it felt like we were saying earlier.
Right. Yeah.
And this was so vivid and real that I just knew what it was. I just didn't know what she meant by get to work. So when I was out in the garden, I just kept thinking about all our different conversations, and I kept hearing how she would always encourage me, you have a way with animals, you have a purpose that you're passionate about. We talked about the angels, and she validated that experience for me and helped me feel good about it. And so I just thought, well, I guess it's something with animals and angels. And on a 95-degree day, I got the biggest chills in my body, just vibrating through me. And, it felt good, but also startling. And I thought, well, okay, there's something to that. And then it was just a light switch. It really was. I felt like an activation after that. I'm like, I have to figure out what I'm supposed to do with this. What am I supposed to do with that experience I had with the angels in college? What am I supposed to do with the connection I've always felt with animals? I still didn't know. It still took a lot of years, but I went to my journal because that's where I was comfortable writing. That's where I was comfortable sharing these experiences and working through these thoughts before I started talking to other people about it. And I remember talking to my sister about it because I was trying to get her to journal more as well. And, she was kind of resistant too. Like, I don't really have time. And what am I going to write about and all that? And I said, well, I have to find something I'm excited about. And I can tell you, I love talking about angels, and I love talking to people who like talking about angels and anything spiritual, really.
Yeah.
And I said, what I like about this topic is a lot of people say, well, prove they exist, that they want proof. But what about, are you going to prove to me that they don't exist? What about flipping it?
Yeah.
Can you prove to me that angels don't exist? And I know that can go down all kinds of pathways and with that conversation, but that was kind of my drive is, well, I feel and believe what I saw and experienced. So I'm going to stick with that and go from there. And then it just opened up the doorways to different teachers. I didn't get a formal mentor until I'd been doing it for, intentionally developing my abilities on my own for about a year. And then I had a couple of experiences that kind of scared me. It was nothing bad, but it was enough for me to go, I don't know what I'm doing. Now that I'm doing this intentionally, I'm not just waiting around for things to happen. I'm doing this intentionally. I need to know a little bit more about this. And what I found is that there's a lot of opinions on what things are called. There's a lot of different terminology.
Yeah.
There's a lot of ways to connect, and you'll get very opinionated people saying, well, that's not an angel, or that's not this, and don't do it that way. But the one common theme I saw amongst all of it, and even with formal religions, was the concept of protection and protecting your energy and setting boundaries. And that was in everything, even in religion, because you have your prayers of protection and you have the different things that you do to protect your energy. And that's when I really started getting fascinated with the way that several of the major religions had certain things in common. I started learning a little bit about integral theory. I certainly don't know a lot about that, but I love the concept of, are you familiar with integral theory?
I am a little bit. You can explain further for anyone who might be listening who might not know.
From what I understand, it's I'm not probably the best person to be explaining what it is, but it identified the similarities amongst the 5 major religions. And I believe the founder of it is Ken Wilber. If I'm right, if I have the name right. I need to probably check that, but I've listened to podcasts on him. But he talks about this concept that, there's all these similarities amongst the major 5 religions. He did in-depth studies of all of them. And what happened was, over time, as humans evolved, the religions didn't. So kind of like a software program, we didn't get Christianity 2.0, we just stayed, the religion stayed the same as humans evolved, and they evolved in their spiritual connection. And that really caught my attention, because I had friends who had other faiths, Judaism and Hinduism and other types of religions that I had studied just in school, that I was asked to do reports on. And, I was always taken back to a point in time, that same trip I went on as a 13-year-old, where I was told that all these Jehovah Witnesses that were worshiping one night as we drove past them, is a building packed of 250 people, that they were all going straight to hell. That's what I was told by our leader.
Yeah.
And again, visceral reaction in my body that no, they're not. That is incorrect. It just was such a knowing. And so when I discovered a little bit about integral theory, and again, not claiming to know much about it, I know there's some very, enthusiastic people about this that can tell you everything, all the details, but I like the idea that if we take a look at all the things that are in common and how they just need to be upgraded with the way that we have grown as a species and grown to connect. Because while we've also had this conditioning, we've also had more communication and more access to each other than we did in ancient times, when it was, you had to kind of believe what the religious leaders were saying, because you didn't have the access of Googling it on the internet.
Right. Yeah. And also, when you look at everything like that in a big picture way, you can see that the core of everything is essentially the same.
Yes. And in that also, humans have that essentially the same need for that connection. I think we're born seeking that connection because we have that illusion of separation. And then with the conditioning that we're given that, yes, you are separate and you have to go do all these things in order to connect with God, or in order to be important or special. And so it's really, as we are, to your entire point, conditioned that we are separate. And then some people don't know how to go find it again, find the connection again.
Right. And I think that the separation with authenticity, because we want to be authentic to ourselves and be unique and individual. But I feel like in order to be effectively authentic, we have to be connected to everything. So when we're able to be our authentic selves, then we can find ways to bring in the people who feel separated in a way that they're able to understand. So we might be able to communicate in a way that is authentic to ourselves, that might be slightly different to someone else, but something that they need to hear. And I don't know if I'm making any sense right now.
You are. I'm right on the same page with you, because I feel like people receive things differently based on their experiences and their perceptions. And that's why we need people out there having these conversations like you're having with your podcast, because somebody may not resonate at all with anything I'm saying about angels or animals, but they might totally resonate with some other piece of artwork that explains the same type of connection. And it's just different terminology. And, I think that's kind of the main thing, is we not only have this illusion of separation, but we're under this illusion that we have control.
Yeah.
And so when you start to feel wait, what do you mean we're all one and the same, and we're all, there's no boundaries there, and it's scary. It's like, I have this control over what I'm doing, and I may not love it. It may not be very comfortable, especially when you see people staying in relationships or jobs that they're really not that happy in. They have this illusion that they're in control of their daily life. So they'll put up with being uncomfortable. They'll put up with the negative energy because, well, at least I know what I'm getting. And if I start to loosen those boundaries and stop seeing myself as separate from my neighbor, that's scary. I don't know that I really want to know my neighbor that much,
Yeah, I think that's the confusing thing, is that you have to have boundaries in order to feel connected. You have to.
Yes. But I think that speaks to what you're saying about your authenticity, because it's, your authentic voice is kind of your boundary, because that's where you're going, wait, where am I still me, and where am I part of the collective, and what I came here to do. I love that you just tied all that, because it's so true. And I love that there's so much happening in the world right now that is bringing this conversation into everything. Even your corporate world. I'm meeting more and more people who are saying, everything ties back to people wanting to understand their spirituality more. So it may not be something that's being talked about in a big convention center, but it is something that people are talking about behind the scenes, and the voice is getting louder.
Yeah, it's trickling in.
Yeah.
And having a ripple effect for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think, I heard somebody, I was asked to speak at the Texas Pet Sitter Convention coming up. And I was trying to kind of figure out how I was going to bring my topic in about using your intuitive abilities and working with the animals. And, one of the ladies that runs it, she said, well, we're just tired of hearing all the things about the best way to hire your employees or the best retirement options. We want something more. We want something. And I thought that's kind of what I'm hearing from everybody, no matter what industry they're in. And especially after the pandemic and the shutdown and people having more time for reflection and space, that they're starting to realize, this missing thing that I was ignoring. I knew it was missing, but I was able to just stay really busy and ignore it.
Yeah. When you do a presentation on angels for a corporation and a skyscraper, then we're going to really have made it, I think.
Exactly. Now we know. One day.
Yeah.
So.
So taking your experience with angels and your experience with your grandmother, where did that lead you next?
It was really a need to teach others that they can do this themselves, that they can have these experiences, that it's not an arm's length experience. Because I think that was my thing. I was lucky enough to have good experiences with formal religion growing up. I know so many people who didn't. And so there were things about the church services that I loved, and I did feel really connected and amazing. and the beauty of some of the ceremony and things like that. I enjoyed that. And I'm grateful that I had those experiences, but there still was this arm's length perception. And it really wasn't until I had that experience with the angels in college that I realized, like, it's right here. Everything is right here. I'm not praying to God over there and then he's sending his angels.
Right.
It's all right here within me because I felt it and saw it, but I didn't have terminology for it, only what I had learned in a Christian faith. And then the idea that you go to the church and you pray there,
Right.
or, you know, all the things that needed to happen before you actually had Jesus in your heart, the way we were taught, you know,
external things that the external distracts you from looking internal. So,
right.
Yeah.
And it's almost like you're giving your power away when you do that. And really a lot of this is us realizing we have the power, you know, empowering ourselves when we connect with our authenticity, is empowering ourselves. And I do feel like I see a lot of people give their power away because of conditioning. And so to answer your question, it was this need to show others, you know, I didn't really know how to do it either, but here's how I did it. And you might do it differently than me, but know that you can. And so really wanting to empower others that through whatever modality they want to choose, whether it's being a yoga instructor, a singer, an actor, you know, you're a construction worker who builds beautiful things, a fireman who's out there, you know, helping others and helping the community, all these ways that we can share something about ourselves, share what's special is helping you connect. And so I think also wanting to kind of take away some of that conditioning. We've heard that, okay, well, if you are going to be a spiritual leader, don't you need to go meditate for 3 years in a monastery? Isn't that what you're supposed to do? or do you have to master levitation before you can actually call yourself spiritual? You know, no matter how far out there you want to go with it. You know, knowing that you can actually do it in the little things. You know, I know you've been to my monthly coffees, and one of our regulars that comes, hasn't been able to go as much because she has a grandbaby and she's wanting to be with her grandbaby a lot. And she said, you know, I just haven't been able to do my journaling and I haven't been able to do my other stuff because I'm so busy. And I was like, well, what's wrong with it? I mean, I feel like that's spiritual in itself. That's that spiritual connection. Being a grandmother, it can be its own version of that. And I mean, I saw that firsthand with just being in the presence of my grandmother made me feel good. And I noticed the difference of being with my grandma versus being with the kid down the street, you know, who was playing video games or something, you know, it was a different feeling that I was experiencing, even if I didn't verbalize it. So I guess I really love the idea of bringing it into all your tasks that you're doing. And so I guess that's full circle to the mundane side of things, but, I still have to do accounting work. I still have to do tax returns and bookkeeping, and I don't always get super excited about it, but I also kind of understand the why behind that in a different sense as well. And that's even its own boundary of, you know, we have to have things organized in order for me to have this space and time for me to do my spiritual work. So trying to just kind of approach things with that different perspective, like, oh, I just can't wait to get all this stuff done so that I can finally go meditate. You know, I can finally go practice astral travel now. You know, it's like, well,
put that
at some point you do have to go to the grocery store. Yeah. Yeah. And I did, you know, I think that was another thing when I was getting started seeking teachers, seeking workshops. I did kind of have that left brain approach a little bit as an accountant. It's like, well, you know, I don't have time to go do a 3-hour yoga workshop right now. I need to do this and this and this. And how do they get anything done? And having to to kind of figure out my own personal balance with other things in my life and still bringing the spiritual side in. And I think that's an ever evolving thing, right? I mean, it's always changing.
Well, I feel like you have to have the mundane in your life in order to have the contrast also, to know what you really like. Because if you don't have that, then it's all just gonna be, I don't know,
Just a
floating
big,
around.
yeah. I think that's exactly what my grandma was trying to say to me when she would say, you know, isn't it great that we're all so different? Because how do you know what you don't want to be, right? Unless you see somebody behaving in a certain way that just doesn't feel good, or they are, you know, they have this huge passion for, let's say, cars, and my passion is horses, and we need somebody who's passionate about cars. We need that so that, you know, that can grow.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I don't have to do that because I want to be over riding my horse. So, yeah, I agree with you on that. I think you're right. It creates that juxtaposition with the bigger things so that we appreciate it more. And I've heard teachers talk about that. I think you have as well, that a lot of the reasons that we choose to incarnate and have this human experience is because of the contrast. It's so much more vivid here in this physical reality when we're in a physical body.
Right. Yeah. So, would you be interested in sharing your process for connecting with the angels? Or, yeah, what would you like to share about that? I don't want to force you to share anything that you're not comfortable with.
Oh, no. Well, you know, for me, I would say, well, I'd like to start off by saying I really feel like it's different for everybody.
Yeah.
So that's another thing that I'm passionate about teaching, is everybody identifying their own way that they get messages. Because back to the artist being just as much, you know, in their spiritual space as the person with the hammer down the road, Bill, that is different, but we're still doing the same thing. For me, it, you know, I've always been very visual. So I would say that I tend to see things if you're familiar with the clairs, you know, there's different ways we can feel things, see things, hear things, just have a knowing again, which is claircognizance. And it took me kind of having to practice with different things to figure out where I get things more. I would say growing up, it was more of a feeling that I would get when I was connecting or feeling a presence with me. And then I think when I really started focusing on my journaling, and I took a painting class and like making things more visual on the outside, it started helping with my visions on the inside. So I start off always by saying a prayer of protection, which I think is, again, one of those things that's common with all the different modalities, whatever you call it. You know, I have a friend that the way she works, she uses totally different terminology than me. So she calls it shielding, or, you know, an energetic pyramid or whatever. And so I start with the prayer of protection. And in my energetic space, I'm saying, I only want to connect with high vibrational beings, and really set that boundary that, you know, I'm going to do that. And then if I'm asking for messages on behalf of someone else, then I'll bring that person into my space with their permission. So I'm pretty regimented about the way I do that, just because of the way I was trained. It makes me feel good. It makes me feel like it's the more ethical way to do it, which is that I would never just ask for an angel message on your behalf without you saying to me, hey, Devon, can we do this? Let's sit and connect. And so I like to have that intention behind it, which is why I get so passionate about journaling and with the methods I teach, because it's really about that intention behind it. And so I have that intention that I'm only connecting with the highest vibrational beings. And again, if it's for, you know, messages with someone else, that they're in there. And then I also ask that we learn what's in our highest interest to know. So you're kind of leaving that open for, if somebody really wants to know if they're going to have an opportunity to date that guy at work, And, is he about to break up with his girlfriend? That might not be in your highest interest to know. So it's not really that kind of connection for me. It's more about gentle guidance. What is in your highest interest to know that you will actually have an opportunity for a new relationship at some point? That's probably much more in your highest interest than knowing the gossip going on with the relationship with the guy you have the crush on. Right.
Right.
So that's what attracted me to working with the angels as well, is because it's subtle guidance. Now, sometimes the guidance will be pretty strong. And that's in your highest interest as well. But again, if you don't listen to it, you're not sinning or being bad, or the angels aren't disappointed in you because you didn't listen to the guidance. And that's another thing that I love about doing this is we leave the guilt at the door. The guilt is, if there's any guilt, that's the person bringing that in. There's no finger pointing with this. And so I literally just, once I feel really grounded and connected and protected in the space, I ask a question, and I will get, again, images, symbols, feelings, depending on the time and where we're sitting. Sometimes I do use cards. I'll pull out cards as like a shorthand to get to the point faster. It just kind of depends on how we're doing the communication with the angels. But for me personally, I usually just say it in my mind. I don't, necessarily do a big production, because I rely on them a lot. Actually, I really do pull angel guidance into everything I do, from choosing people I work with to, do I feel like that store has what I need in it? Do I feel a pull there, and listening and feeling like I feel pushed to go in there? I can't tell you how many times I'm kind of a crystal geek. I love crystals and they're just fun. I always have. And I will so many times feel an urge to stop in to a store that I know has them and find something that is just perfect for a spot in my house, or I'll just feel this need to go in there. And there's something I didn't even know. It's not that I didn't know I needed it. It's just, I didn't know where I was going to find it. And I hadn't put a lot of effort into finding it. And then there it was right in front of me. So I have a lot of fun stories like that I keep track of in my journal, just as evidence of the daily help we can have through checking in with our inner voice. So, I guess I would say I can't really give you a very specific thing other than, there's so many ways to connect. And it starts with everyone figuring out where do they get their most connection. And I think a lot of people who think they can't do this kind of work, it's because they tend to be more claircognizant. They just have a knowing, and they don't identify that as their way of getting information. And they say, oh, I just knew. I don't know how I knew. I just knew, but that doesn't mean anything. And they're not giving it credit. So that's another reason I love journaling, because I feel like you're giving yourself credit for all the ways that you're connecting to your authentic voice.
Amazing. And like going back full circle, you are teaching, like you said, that you wanted to, and you were teaching in a way that is super authentic to you. So that's
thank you.
That's
I
really
do
special,
feel like that. Yeah. It's funny. When you have that gift of hindsight, which is another thing that I feel like journaling gives you, I can see all the ways that I've used that need for teaching, but also the business world and the accounting side, and experiencing the passion with entrepreneurs. And also, like you said, seeing the life I didn't want. I didn't want to be in a back office with no windows, not seeing my family and my animals. And that juxtaposition was very helpful to me in figuring out what my purpose was. And I think we're always growing with that, but and I think we're always evolving. And I think that's the other part, is it's not a straight line to our purpose ultimately. And being okay with it not being a straight line. And then maybe even thinking we've gotten there. Okay, this is it. And then allowing that to evolve and grow. that's tough. That's tough for me. I like structure. I like to know the answer.
I
Two
think
plus two is always four.
right. Oh, the numbers. Yeah, I imagine. So numbers. Okay. So you have numbers with accounting. Do you experience numbers with the angels ever?
Big time. Yes.
Yeah.
That was one of my first ones that I was seeing visually, is just numbers everywhere in the most ridiculous places, not just the clock, and,
Yeah.
and then, I started tracking all the times I would see numbers, and I was just using up pages and pages in a couple of days.
Yeah.
And so then I was like, okay, now that I'm pretty confident that this isn't an accident, that I'm just, seeing these synchronicities in these series of numbers. What do they mean? And that's where that's how I started developing the journaling that I teach, the methods. Is I wanted people to have a way to easily review the intuitive hits they've had, the symbols they've received, so they can create their own language with their angels. And I think that's kind of the biggest thing that people don't know when they're starting off, is that what a red cardinal means to me may mean something totally different to you, and no one's right or wrong. It's what 1111 means to you means something else. Now, I think we do have like these collective ideas of what these things mean, and I think that can be helpful when you're getting started, to kind of know, well, generally when people see 444, it's a sign their angels are with them, or something to that effect. If that's where you want to start, I would encourage you to do that. But I have found it really fun to kind of develop that own language with my guides and my angels. And it's almost like an inside joke.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, my experience with that, it almost becomes humorous the way that the synchronicities happen and the numbers repeat over and over and over again.
It is. And you know what? It's also funny. What happen for me is when my attitude isn't the best, that's when they'll get a laugh out of me, because they get in front of me so much that I'm like, okay, fine. I'm being very grumpy about this. Time to shift my perspective and take a deep breath, go do some breath work and get out of this mindset. So it is funny. It's almost like, I say the angels are gentle, but it's almost like they get more in your face the more they know that you trust the connection.
Yeah.
And you build a stronger bond with them. And then even in the same with guides as well. I have guides I work with, and I feel like, the more you practice with them, getting to know them, the stronger the connection, and maybe the more opinionated it might feel sometimes, but it's information I need to know. Right. So yeah, I love that.
So, if people would like to work with you, or have a reading with you, as they are lovely, because I've had one myself, so I can
thank you.
Be a testimonial for that. How can people find you and like come across your work?
Sure. Well, thank you for asking. I have several ways you can reach out to me. I'm on all the regular platforms. I have a YouTube channel where I share stories about my experiences. I also have tools and tips for developing your intuition, and even angel messages on there. I also host a monthly coffee. It's totally free online, where we talk about angels, so I can answer your questions if you're trying to get started with this. And then what I'm most passionate about is teaching journaling. And so I actually, either today or tomorrow, I'm supposed to have my first advanced copy of a custom journal I created, that will be available in March.
Wow.
It has the templates to help you get started with developing this language with your angels or your guides or whatever it is that you're interested in. It's more so that you can be organized in the way that you understand your abilities and as you grow, because then when you go back and review it, it's easy to find. So if you just go to devonduerr.com/book, you can see about that, or just devonduerr.com has events I have coming up. And I encourage you to join the coffee if you have any interest in this, because we have a lot of people who don't feel like they have anyone to talk to about this. And that was my biggest reason for creating this. Is we've been doing it for over 2 years now. And it's been so fun to see the growth in everyone who, once you start working on this, it just expands and expands. So I'd love to see you there. And I'm also on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook.
All the great places. I'll put those links into the show notes so people can click on them really easily.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And, I'm always eager to answer questions. And I had one more point I was going to say about the coffee and I forgot, but just that, I'm really all about empowering others to do this on their own. That's really what it is. And I want people to know that they don't have to wait around to book an appointment with an intuitive to have the guidance that could really help them in the moment. And I remembered my other point is not everyone's into angels or guides, right? They would rather study astrology or mediumship or all kinds of other things. And so what I'm really after is that whatever it is that draws your attention, that you're giving yourself that future gift of writing it down and keeping track of it so you can see your growth and see the way that you receive this information from your authentic voice.
Oh, excellent. That was a great way. Great addition. So to wrap up the conversation, I usually ask this question. If your inner authentic voice had a billboard, what would it say to the world?
I think it would say, you can do this too. And this part, that's such a great question. I wish I had a fancier answer prepared, but
you don't need a fancy answer because I feel like a lot of the answers are fancy in the simplicity.
Oh, that's beautiful. And this part of that statement is the fact that there are so many ways to connect. And even if, let's say you have a faith you really love, you grew up in your Christian faith, let's say, and it's been amazing for you and you love it and hold it true to your heart. That's beautiful. That's your way of connecting, and that, more power to you. And that's the beauty of us all being different in the way we connect. But, I think we're all special and everybody can do it.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me this week. If you're listening and you like what you hear, please consider subscribing and rating this podcast, as it really helps get this podcast out to other people who might be interested in hearing it but don't know about it yet. And also, if you'd like to contact me or reach me, you can reach me at unconditioningpodcast@gmail.com or unconditioningpodcast on Instagram. Thank you so much, and until next time, stay tuned in to you.